So I was going to say good morning, everyone, but happy noon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michelle Maloney. I'm one of the co-founders and the national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. Thank you so much for signing up to join us today for our wonderful adventure into the world of the Greenprints program. Before I commence the commencements, let me share screen and acknowledge country. Very good. Just a reminder, this presentation is being recorded. It's lovely to see you all. If for whatever reason you prefer to turn your camera off, that's great. Christina and I will help you make sure you stay on mute. And if you've got any questions at any time, please do pop them in the chat. So welcome to How to Use the Greenprints approach. I'm really honoured that you would join us in your busy lunchtime. I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the beautiful lands of the Yagara Turrbal peoples here in North Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and the really truly remarkable governance system and peoples who've cared for this continent since time immemorial. As part of the work that I do as a descendant of the Irish folks who came to Australia through the British convict and colonial project, I'd like to also acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonisation on this continent and my personal commitment and the commitment of my organisations to, whether you call it decolonising or really deepening our acknowledgement of the sovereignty of First Nations peoples and the history of our country, or whether you just call it really embracing our responsibility to care for country and to care for each other. I really like to make sure that we mention we feel very strongly about that commitment. I would invite you all to take a nice deep breath and have a think about where you live, work and play, on whose soil you wander about, and which plants and animals live there with you. In our busy rushing from one Zoom meeting to another, I find it's nice to just literally be invited to take a moment, take a deep breath and remember, did you see a bee in your garden this morning, or a butterfly or a bird, or maybe some trees? Or if you're not in a garden, did you look out across beautiful scenery? So do have a think about the plants and the animals today, because that's what I think about every day. And that's certainly what's inspired the development of the work of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. And on that note, many of you may have seen this photo already, but this beautiful image is at a place where I walk my dogs called Nudgy Nunda in Turrbal language, Black Duck Waterhole. So people here know it as Nudgy Waterhole, but it's still nice that there are elements of the traditional and original language describing places where I live. So our presentation today, what I'm going to do is tell you about this Greenprints approach thing that we've created inside AELA. So what is it? Why do we need it, or why did we create it? Who can use it and how? I'll give you a bit of an overview of some of the folks starting to connect into our network. It's all very new. We've been building the system itself for many years, a lot of deep research. But the community of lovely folks coming together around these areas of work is still quite new, but we've already got quite some stories to share with you. I will go into a bit more detail about the Greenprint steps than I normally do in any of our short talks. And we will also give you a couple of examples of the very beginnings of some of the projects we're working on. We've allowed an hour and a half. Everybody knows I can talk about earth laws for days on end. I'm going to try to keep my talk to about 30 or 40 minutes, maybe a bit longer, but then we'll still have heaps of time for questions and discussion. And we really do welcome your frank, open questions, comments, suggestions. This process that we've developed is pretty much organic. It's going to continue to evolve and get better over time, and as more and more people connect with us and we all explore it and use it together. So what is the Greenprints approach? Well, the origins of Greenprints, the name itself, was really just a nickname that I was using because, and I'll tell you a little bit about the origins of the creation of this approach. For a lot of you who know me, you know that in 2015, I was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer. I was very, very lucky that they found it early, and I was treated and managed after a year of treatment to come good. But it was actually during that time when I couldn't move much, but my lovely brain kept working, that I was really starting to process what we've been doing inside AELA and what we really needed to do next. So the origin of the word Greenprints is just a nickname that I put together when it's not rocket science. And I wrote it here. So while we have blueprints to design the construction of buildings and infrastructure, we really don't have yet, and we really do need greenprints, pathways to help people, communities, organizations, and governments create clear pathways to building regenerative societies. And the key thing that we look at is how we live within our ecological limits. There's lots and lots of tools out there that help us think about really important issues, but they're often not located to place. And they don't really try, particularly in mainstream systems, they're really not focused on challenging the growth mode. And they're not focused on really trying to live within the resource and biophysical realities of where we live and how we live. So Greenprints was a name that stuck, and in a world full of many, many big words and trends and moving, changing themes, it's as good a word as any. We could have called it cucumber, but Greenprints has stuck, and it's nice because we can use it as a noun and a verb. And the whole point of this is to acknowledge and respect all of the remarkable work that Indigenous people have been doing for thousands of years, and that awesome non-Indigenous people have been grappling with for many, many decades, as we try to move human societies into a more sustainable or regenerative way of being. So I want to say right up front, Greenprints comes to you with humility. It's not a new invention. We're just trying to make clearer and easier ways for everybody to engage in the kinds of steps we need to take to change the way we do things, particularly as non-Indigenous societies in this beautiful continent and broader planet. And the logo for Greenprints really does tell you that story. It is literally or visually saying, let's pattern humanity and human societies, which have outgrown so many of the resources that have supported us. Let's pattern human societies back into the regenerative capacity of the living world. So if my long talk today and our broader discussion about all the complexities of our efforts is in any way not as clear as you'd like it to be, this is really the image that you can cling to. What we've been trying to do inside AELA is make it easier for ordinary people like me, like you, like others, building different systems and trying to connect together to do awesome things together. So let me tell you about the little vision for Greenprints, what we're actually aiming for, before we go into the nuts and bolts of how bits and pieces of it work and what we're experimenting with. So our vision is like so many other people on the planet. We really want human societies that can thrive within their ecological limits, have living economies, but support the living world rather than destroy it. And our beautiful banner, created by a really lovely artist, Kat Atkinson over in WA, after I tortured her with many, many draft sketches. This image is used across a lot of the materials we're developing, and it's just a beautiful image of bright, happy, living world with healthy waters, healthy animals, and healthy plants and people. But the way to think about Greenprints is just for today, and hopefully, and I'm sure many of you do this anyway, let's ignore political borders for a little while. Let's just think about the living world. So what we're excited about is the potential, particularly in the uniqueness of our continent, to restore and support the remarkable, unique living systems across this entire continent. So our vision involves healthy bioregions and thriving biodiversity. And bioregions, really the purest form of what they are is Mother Nature telling us what's going on in a place. In Australia right now, some Western science acknowledges that we've got 89 bioregions, which are all slightly different to their next door neighbours, built on from the ground up, from the geology, the soils, the types of plants that exist in that place, the microclimates, the plants themselves, the vegetation, and of course the animals. So the way to think about this is bioregions are Mother Nature's way of telling us about the different, unique and wonderful aspects of different places. And although they're not a perfect tool for all aspects of human activity, if we were to look at the health of bioregions as a starting point, rather than squishing nature into political boundaries, it already starts the process of rethinking, well, what's actually going on in this place and how can we pattern ourselves into it rather than keep extracting and destroying. But we're not ideological. We just want you to start. We want the process to start with looking at the living world first and then thinking about human beings. We're part of the living world, but often human planning processes, human sustainability processes, visioning. It all starts with what humans want. That doesn't actually help us live within boundaries. So whether you're looking at bioregions, subregions, teeny tiny ecosystems, or healthy catchments and waterways, which is another way to look at Mother Nature. And it's become a very popular way in the last 50 years for Westerners to think about looking after and measuring and keeping track of water quality and health. So catchments are literally where the water is caught and where the water flows. And all of this stuff is just ways that human beings look at the living world. And you can see just from bioregions and catchments alone, they don't have straight lines. Mother Nature is bendy and curvy and varies and full of life. And that's what the Greenprints approach is about. Let's look at the life and let's pattern ourselves back in. And of course, the First Peoples and their remarkable governance system. For those who don't know, I work with Mary Graham. She's an adjunct associate professor of political science at UQ. She's also a Convenor person, and I think one of the most remarkable thinkers, writers, and human beings in Australia at this moment in time. And if you haven't heard of Mary Graham, please do look her up, Google her. She, myself, James, Ross Williams, and several other wonderful folks have created Future Dreaming, where we're working to honour Indigenous knowledge systems and ensure that Indigenous and non-Indigenous people can share ecological knowledge to build a really great future. So healthy country and flourishing peoples is obviously a critical part of what we're doing here in Australia and here inside Greenprints. So that's what we want. We want flourishing living world and happy, flourishing human beings inside of it. But how do we do it? And how do we actually shift from being this deeply ingrained pro-growth extractive type of industrial society to something else? You could use different words: steady state, regenerative, living within limits. All of these terms have problems and flaws, but how do we become an ecological society? One that can live in a place forever, despite all the challenges that face us. And a little question that I always like to pose is, how do we really do it properly and avoid greenwashing? Because what we have seen over the last 50 or 60 years, and I refer to 50 or 60 years because it's since 1972 that internationally, with the big Stockholm Declaration and the giant gathering, the first time all the nation states, or most of them, got together to acknowledge we have problems and started to build sustainability frameworks. There's also been a huge potential for vested interests and the sneaky maneuvers of capitalism to make money out of so-called sustainability. How do we make sure that we build ourselves deeply into place, care for the living world, have a great life, but we don't allow ourselves to get greenwashed and, I guess, corporatized or in any other way influenced in such a fashion that we're just pretending that we're doing the right thing when really we're not? So before I tell you about Greenprints, I love this quote: "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And this is what I like to say about Greenprints. It's sort of a model. It's really just some stepping stones that brings a heap of research together to make it easier for folks so they don't have to do all of that research every time. So please be aware that we do not think Greenprints is the be all and end all. It's just our offering to be very practical and yet also connecting to some really big picture ideas that are trending, for want of a better word, at the moment. So Greenprints does two things. It's providing a practical step-by-step approach to help people understand all the big picture stuff, but also the small details of how we can unpick the bits of society that we want to change today and keep all the good stuff. And it demystifies and connects, as I mentioned before, all of the varied concepts, models, and methods that can be used to create sustainable and regenerative communities. And again, with humility and with great respect for all of the terrific approaches and ideas out there, Greenprints just tries to make it easier for people to use the good bits that are out there at a time and a place in the moment of what they're working on that helps their work. So we always talk about Greenprints as both a process, which in a lot of ways in an ideal world would sort of go on forever, where we're constantly tracking human impact in a place and really assessing what we can and can't do to ensure life. But in that first initial development of work, we can also produce particular outcomes, scenarios that can show very specifically, but also tell a story about how we can change stuff to do it better and to actually achieve what many of us are striving for and thriving for. So it's a process. What do we mean by that? I will literally talk you through the steps. And I know it's a cliche of Western thinking, 7 easy steps to be a billionaire, or 8 easy steps to be a successful human. What we found and what I've found, and I'll talk again in a moment about my own experience, is just the sheer volume of stuff that's out there. What we wanted was a simple pathfinder, a way to just move through all the good stuff. So we offer an earth-centered process. Sometimes that's how you differentiate Greenprints from others. We literally start with planet Earth, as I said, bioregions, plants and animals, and then try to work out what's going on in our place and find the best tools to use. And that looks at all of the scales, local, regional, and connecting up and down with the global efforts. But the outcome side of it, which has significant potential for lots of folks who really want to get focused on the detail of specific areas to change and transform, is the scenario building. So the outcome. Theoretically, if we got 15, 20 community groups and a whole bunch of interested humans and possibly even a local council together over a 1 or 2 year period, or even quicker, and we actually started to look across our bioregion or ecosystems and really examine what needs to change, we can develop scenarios informed by real info about our place, and develop scenarios really showing what's going to happen if we keep doing what we've been doing for 200 years versus where are the specifics that we can change. And it's not just an abstract. We talk about it in abstract, but everything, the rubber hits the road or the solar panel reaches the roof when we actually start to focus on place, the unique undulation of the land, the mountains, the soils, the terrain, the plants, the animals, the vegetation, the cities, the towns, the people. Everything is place specific. So the intention is that by using these steps, we can help to create a deeper understanding of that living world, because we've done the work. We've pulled together all the amazing work that's already been done by others, then show some place-based, very viable alternative options for how we use land, how we build houses, how we use water, etc. So, and I'll talk a bit more about this later if we have time, but I just wanted to say that a huge amount of work has been put into the thinking behind this, because Greenprints really does offer not just these step-by-step, but a pretty practical way to help people turn everything on their head, moving from a human-centered, patriarchal, colonial, nature as property worldview to an earth-centered, place-based, decolonized, living within ecological limits. So really helping to change thinking and change that worldview in the first place, but also a deep examination of our economic system from expansionist, extractivist mode, which colonial projects are quite literally the product of. It's because Europeans from the 1500s and after decided that they needed more resources, more and more. Instead of staying put and working out how to do it, they moved on to other places. That expansionist, extractivist mode of being in our economic and political system is still profoundly entrenched in what we do today. What we're interested in is connecting all these cool ideas that we've had for decades around steady state, regenerative, and more recently, donut economics. Law and governance, there's a whole body of work in there that I won't talk too much about, but it's really exciting because once you do a Greenprints process, then you can turn the legal system on its head and say, instead of universalism and top-down federal laws and top-down state laws, what would it look like if we actually changed the legal system to embed all of these place-based practices and actually changed what we did as mainstreamers or non-Indigenous societies in particular? And yes, that would be connecting with the deep law of obligation and place-based localized way of being that Aboriginal people have always had. It's not appropriating their approach, it's listening and learning and understanding that the relationist ethos and the law of obligation that Indigenous people live by can inform the way we transform to more regenerative ways of being. And of course, the political system, which is, well, where do you start? But the key thing that I personally and that we focus on in the Greenprints approach is really helping people pause for a moment and think about who makes decisions, where power is allegedly lying around the decisions of how we care for place and don't care for place. And we really want to engage with rigorous discussions about different ways of doing stuff. so that ultimately one day, maybe it won't be in my lifetime, but I hope one day our local communities will have strong ethics and benchmarks for caring for country, and our legal systems will embed and support that, rather than what we've got now, planning laws, oil, petroleum, gas, exploration and extractivist laws, all of these things that are built on high, far away, and imposed on places. Some folks might think some of that's good, jobs and growth. Others really get frustrated that endless development coming to their place is something that's really difficult to challenge. So in the background of all the work we're doing, I'm extremely passionate about democratizing information, about how we make decisions as communities, about caring for place. I'm also passionate about democratizing and changing the political system. Again, possibly not in my lifetime, but certainly part of those discussions. So that's the big picture thinking behind Greenprints, and I've tried to move through that sort of without being too long-winded. But then that's all great, fabulous. People have been at this sustainability stuff for 30, 40 years. Regeneration or regenerative everything is now the flavor. What difference does Greenprints make? Well, we'll see. No promises, I guess. But what we're interested in is literally how do we get there from here? And it took me a little while to try to make just this really basic common sense way of doing this earth-centered stuff without freaking people out with too much confusion, I guess, at the beginning of things, and then really connecting into the governance systems that we have. So we've tried to have this pathway to create all of the stuff that we've been talking about. It's not perfect. And I'll come back to some of the bits and pieces about how we do the steps and why that's not as neat and tidy as we pretend that it looks like in those steps. It's a messy space. But why do we need it? And I'll move through this quickly because I've actually already touched on some of this bigger analysis. Why do we need something like Greenprints at the moment? Well, for those, again, who don't know much about our work, I should contextualize what we're up to. The Australian Earth Laws Alliance was co-created by myself and a few others about 10 years ago. And our interest is how we shift from human-centered to earth-centered governance and ways of life. How do we move towards being an ecological society so we can rein in the worst of what we've done and really build a new way of thinking inside modern industrialized societies? AELA's work has always been about that systems change, and how do we not just tweak a couple of sections in a law reform proposal, but how do we actually look at the whole place and how do we rethink what we're doing? There's other information and talks that I've given about the sort of the analysis of AELA's work. But what I just want to mention is that it's from this work and looking across these different governance approaches in our system that has led to the Greenprints approach, because Greenprints brings all of it together in a fairly practical sort of way. And our influences are Western deep ecology, earth jurisprudence, which is associated with the work of Thomas Berry and his awesome book, The Great Work, Our Way into the Future. But equally, and if not more so, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, by working with Mary Graham and people like Anne Polina around Indigenous first laws, and listening and learning from elders and thinking about how do we get the 96% of Australians who are not Indigenous engaging in this way of thinking, and what does that mean in practical terms for our very modern, often complex technological societies where power and money and decision-making often feels like it's being done far away in Canberra or capital cities or in office rooms of corporate board discussions. So these problems that Greenprints wants to address: one, overshoot. Industrial societies have been taking too much from Mother Earth. We know that growth economics, and I just mentioned the colonial expansionist way of being for 600 years, has really played out in the stuff that we've been doing to Mother Earth and to Australia as a colonial, modern colonial nation state. We know that the planetary boundaries have been breached, this remarkable body of work by Earth system scientists. We know that more recently we've discovered we're not just breaching 3 of the 9 boundaries that keep life safe on the planet, but 4. And that's a big, scary thing, but things that we can continue to work towards. I love this image because James Lee, who does many things in AELA, but also does the graphic design, made sure we had one with Australia in it, because we're often forgotten. Normally it's North America, sometimes Europe. So we have these problems, we have overshoot, and the question we ask, you know, and that many of us ask is, so our modern industrialized nation state, and this shows the political boundaries, not Mother Nature, are we in overshoot? And if we are, how do we live within our limits? For those who are deeply ingrained in thinking about nature and the living world, this is obvious. But remember that most of our society, unfortunately, is still locked in a paradigm of expansionism, extractivism. Certainly many of our political leaders are. So how do we live within our limits if we've never had structures to do that? And in my PhD, when I was looking at the regulation of reducing consumption, something I was interested in at the time and still am, this big gap, meaning we've been trying to do this stuff, but we literally don't have the tools or the measurements or the incentives or the financial support to do this stuff properly. And that's a really strange thing to me after so many decades of civil society and scientists working hard to do so. And so when we ask this question, are we in overshoot? Here's one of the answers. This is a really important set of maps, 20 million bucks worth of phenomenal research done by the Australian Koala Foundation, digging right down literally to landscape level. But this is the high level map that shows just one indicator of what we've done in 200+ years. It might not look like much, but when you think about all the white bits on the right, as of 2016, our ecosystems completely transformed by human activities. And these are places where animals have gone extinct, plants have gone extinct, soils have been eroded. Obviously, there's been impact in other areas, the Channel Country and such, but this particular map shows just pure original vegetation loss. That tells us that something's not quite right. And in particular, as a lawyer, I like to remind people, pretty much all of that destruction has not just been legal, it's been encouraged and in fact required by our governments and their own institutionalized policies about what growth looks like or what agricultural systems look like. So we do have some problems in Australia, but we don't really have the level of mainstreamed structural ways to undo this mess. There's phenomenal efforts around the continent by people doing good stuff. And again, this is what Greenprints is hoping to engage with, this idea that we're in overshoot, we're using too much. I'm not going to talk about this slide today, but for anyone who's interested, if you ever want some ammunition to really show people why our governance system, our laws, our politics, our economics are still colonial, still patriarchal, still fundamentally racist, and treat Indigenous peoples largely as invisible in the legal structures, despite Mabo, despite many native title and other developments. The system we have is still profoundly top-down and controlled by elites. And if you get in trouble with the law, it's still a case that says the Crown versus Michelle Maloney. So if there's any simple indicator to remind us we're living within medieval laws, the Crown is a good one to remind us. Our laws, economics, education systems, many of the aspects of modern society are not fit for purpose at a time when we're facing our ecological crisis and social justice crises too. And I know that many of you know that already, and I won't go on about it. But another reason we love Greenprints is because, and I've already run you through this concept of challenging all these big picture ideas whilst getting on with the work as well. It's not just piecemeal. The second of the three problems that Greenprints was designed to help with is probably the core of Earth jurisprudence. The idea that we have a deep disconnection of modern industrialized societies, people, us, from the living world that we're part of and that we depend upon. Not everyone. I'm sure most of this group listening to me today are very connected, love the living world. But when you look at Thomas Berry's work or you engage with Indigenous knowledge, it becomes very obvious that modern societies, people are waking up in air-conditioned houses, jumping in air-conditioned cars, driving to their air-conditioned office, going to an air-conditioned Woolworths, buying their food wrapped in plastic and coming home again. It doesn't really provide a society that helps us understand the soils, the creeks, the plants, where our food comes from, how we care for country. So this disconnection is another thing that Greenprints is hoping to play a part in addressing. And the third pathway, and And it's the third problem that we're trying to be part of the solution for is this lack of clear pathways to just bring more and more people together to do all the things they're already doing, but really start to see what's going on across their communities and societies. This lack of a clear pathway to solve the problems. We have an abundance of tools, but in our analysis, and James can vouch for this particularly, we have literally thousands of data sets showing mapping information about this continent. Much of it's been developed by scientists for scientists to understand, or worse, it's been developed by various folks, including scientists, for corporations to understand what they can go and extract next. Some of the most detailed mapping systems are for gas and oil, and minerals extraction. But your ordinary human being doesn't know what's being planned for the local catchment or creek unless they've dug around and found their local catchment or creek managing group. Woolworths, Lend-Lease, all the big corporations, they know where they've owned them, where they've got the land, what they're doing in 30 years' time in a certain area. They're watching the growth of communities and residences. They work with government to create planning laws. Ordinary people who are constantly trying to respond to new development proposals need more information, and they need it sooner rather than later and in a way that we can process, so that we as societies can have a greater say over what's going on in our local area. Because our systems today, unfortunately, are very complex, and it's unpicking them that becomes difficult. And I just wanted to run you through, in terms of part 3 of why we're trying to develop Greenprints to make it easier. We have a phenomenal amount of tools, and I'm going to whiz through these quickly just to show you some of the thinking. You know, the early days of sustainability ridiculously had these sort of 3 intersecting circles. So for decades, people were trying to balance them, and that influenced the detail of decision-making in government, but that's not actually the real world. People knew that fundamentally human beings have to live within our limits, but we did not develop the tools or systems to really do that. And even a lot of the efforts inside government planning and resource expansion, it wasn't something that they considered. Now we've got these SDGs. Some of them are creating a really good impetus for people around the world to connect to some of these core goals. Will Steffen, I guess, really made me happy when he said that, in fact, the development of these sustainable development goals was connected to the planetary boundaries idea, but it's still got human growth and development in there. And we know that a lot of the people trying to roll these things out aren't connecting the dots with ecological limits. Trends around circular economy, that's terrific. But if we just focus on circular economy, we will literally just keep going around in circles. We often don't know literally where are our resources coming from and where is the waste going to. They're often a lot more interested in making sure that what we have, we keep using well, and that's great. But where are the connecting points with place? Life cycle benefit analysis, nature positive. Nature positive is the big thing. These are very cool. But again, one comment I should make is one of our business partners said that she got her folks to research all of the different sustainability and other tools that are available for corporations and businesses to use, something like 260 around the world. None of them connect resource use to place. You might have the odd forest stewardship program that says trees from this place shouldn't be used in a certain way. But in terms of the overall systems we're using in our society, think about it as 4 feet above the earth, and everyone's trying to track how much energy they use or how much water they use, but they're not saying we're actually using water from the precious Darling River, and we know that this is our place in this bioregion, and how do we become positive contributors to health in this place rather than just taking. So these are the things. We've got planetary boundaries, we've got donor economics, ecological footprint method. There's so many different tools out there. Anyway, I've labored the point. That's trying to create colorful confusion. Indigenous knowledge systems, all the different things we can do, but how do we do it? When do we do it? I've already told you about the origins of Greenprints, and the only reason that I feel that's important is it's possibly because of my bizarre career path that brought me from everywhere across different kinds of knowledge systems and different kinds of projects that I started to see that the ecological limits aspect really could be woven into some of these systems profoundly differently. And I'm really excited by the sheer range of activities that people are up to and the potential for bringing all of that together. So we've talked about our justification for why we're doing it. And I'm just going to frame quickly who can use Greenprints and how, and then I'll talk you through the steps. Cool. So who can use Greenprints and how can they use it? We've got these cute little icons, just to remind me, we've got folks thinking on their own, how can I do good things? We've got Indigenous leaders and communities around Australia already doing remarkable caring for country, but they are still trapped inside this modern industrialised system too. And I'll talk about one of the examples of working with the Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council and how Greenprints is sitting in the background supporting them. We'll talk about that later. Schools and education, that's also universities, businesses, communities, local councils. We don't have state or federal government. We would dare to dream that they'd be interested in something like this, maybe one day. So our community so far, we've got, for those who already know, there's really a cool regenerative, I think of it as the regenerative cities movement with Regen Melbourne, Regen Sydney, myself and Kira and James and many others in Brisbane are part of Regen Brisbane. A lot of these groups are now starting to connect to Greenprints. We have 2 local councils connecting to Greenprints. It's not yet official, but we're looking forward to further discussions and seeing how they can kind of use it as a scaffolding for their work. We also have quite a lot of environmental and civil society groups. It's popped up in some university courses, the actual mode or method. We've been working with some school teachers, thinking about how to do a little bit of simple curricula. And a number of the religious networks, especially the Catholic CRA, because of the Pope's encyclical several years ago, many multi-faith groups obviously have an environmental concern, hugely involved in climate change work, but they're also starting to connect with us, which is really exciting. So I just wanted to mention that because this isn't all just abstract. Today is all about, how to use it, but I've needed to share with you, it's early days. We've been developing the ideas and more people, it seems to be resonating with them. So what have I got here? So the steps, very quickly, this is so simplistic. It's about let's think differently and define ecological boundaries relevant for whatever project we're doing and understand our ecological foundations. Then, and this is the 2 and 3, 1, 2, and 3 are probably the radical bits of it for many aspects of our institutionalized growth society. But number 4 is massive. It's, well, then, okay, once we've worked out where we are and what's happening, how do we understand all of the human activities in here? Past, since Indigenous control of land to colonization. And then we can do some kind of rough health check. Are we an overshoot? None of this is about perfect measurements in the early days. It's what's going on. And it's the understanding human activities that often reveals the great shockers. But I'll come to that when I talk about the steps. In terms of the impact we've had, a lot of people don't know. That wonderful social commentator, George Monbiot, he wrote this cool article once, and one of the quotes was something like, we've reached a time when remembering is a radical act. Just remembering or even being aware of what used to be in a place, the massive trees, the clear water, the remarkable animals, and now in many places, so much of it is gone. What are we working towards if we don't know what Mother Nature looked like even as early as 100 years ago? So this understanding human activities and maps and photos and just getting a full picture of our bioregional catchment, sometimes it's pretty intense. So health check and then scenarios. So you can only develop real scenarios if we know what's going on. If you've got a place and 80% of it's been cleared for agriculture and the community says, well, actually all our soils are blowing away in the ag, maybe cattle, maybe other things might be a contributor to climate change and carbon and methane and other problems, then you've suddenly got a pretty easy no-brainer way of saying, maybe we try to restore and do different kinds of economic activities in this place. And you've suddenly put your arms around it. You can identify across land use, very specific aspects, connecting it all up, getting all the folks who have been helping the creeks, getting all the folks and the wildlife carers, but actually looking across landscape and really coming together and saying, we can see what this bioregion used to be, and we can see the problems we've made. How do we work together to do that differently? And that's where scenarios can be very powerful, because Greenprints is passionate about weaving the economic story into the landscape. As you might know, in the 80s, environment, ecology, were all very separate from the economy. And Greenies like myself got accused of just saying, no, stop this, stop that. And obviously what we've seen in the last 15, 20 years is a shift towards, well, this is how we should transform. So they are the basic steps. Obviously, collective decision-making. This is the power structure. This is who is involved. That actually starts up in step 1. And then the action plans and the tweakables. It's not to reinvent the wheel. All the good things that are happening, great, let's keep going. Land restoration, all the other good things. But let's strengthen that by having a very clear understanding of what business as usual will do to a place. We've been working with folks in the Sunshine Coast, and we know that if residential development continues the way it has been now, there will be nothing left except houses. There will be no koalas, there will be no trees. And the kinds of developments that are happening in that bioregion are really not nice for human beings either. So there's a lot of room to do good things. So that is the simple 8 steps. And as I said, it's these literally trying to do all of this inside our ecological understandings. That is really, I'll often joke, it's a revolution. If people can even think that way in government, that would be unusual. There's obviously a feedback loop. In a perfect world, you would work all this stuff out, you would make some transitions, you would probably connect with a lot of degrowth ideas, redefine a good economy, not growth for corporates far away, but thriving, healthy, supportive, well-being economies in place, and then have an enlightened society, or at least enlightened leaders, continuing to keep an eye on what we're up to. Greenprints fits within a simple 3-phase systems change approach. I want to mention that for anyone who's an expert or interested in, it's not rocket science. I should probably put a little arrow through that little rocket. None of this, we're not saying this is all very clever and flash. It's just joining up dots in places. And there is no snail of destiny. I like to linger on this so that you have this little snail embedded in your mind. Greenprints has some logical steps to keep us sane. It's actually my sanity pill, but it's very messy, iterative, full of feedback loops and lots of barriers. The steps muddle together, but the steps themselves are what people are finding a little bit useful, and that's good enough for me. So the steps in more detail, I'm not going to go into them too long because I have been yarning for a while. I'll just show you, I'll literally cast your mind across some of these slides, and then you'll be able to see all of the different ideas and thinking that's within each step. But again, it's all unique to place and the people who catalyze the work. So the steps, I just said that. What we can do, depending on people's interest, if they just come in and use Greenprints as an educative thing, you don't need to do this. But if you're a community and you want to start building, bringing everyone together slowly or quickly into a space where you can do that work together, we start what we call a workbook. Again, not rocket science, but it's really handy because you start to have some sets of maps, some sets of ideas that help you stay focused on the areas and the kind of the next steps. So within these steps, we think differently. But I like to think of it as think and work differently. The really important stuff for us, and this might, again, I'm sure that all of you are really interested in the living world. Ecocentric thinking must be like breathing for you. It certainly is for me, but for lots of other people, it's not. And I've said after 33 years working on environmental and sustainability and climate change stuff, getting Western brains to actually really deeply understand that this planet is about more than us is the greatest trick. Because as soon as you've got people engaged in that, they're making decisions on a daily basis that include the rest of the system. But how decisions are made, who thinks they're in charge of land, who thinks they're in charge of consumption and production, how do we do all that? Then you've got a whole bunch of other fun things to play with. We do workshops around any of these things, including concepts of time. The wonderful Louise Crabtree Hayes, who's a professor at the University of Western Sydney, gives a remarkable talk about how Western notions of time are literally driving the housing crisis. Because it's only our idea of so-called progress and future that gives us a market for housing as something that's always going to go up. To me, that was hugely radical, because if you have a multidimensional concept of time like Indigenous people in traditional societies, you don't think that the future is going to be better than today. Today is today, because today is yesterday and tomorrow. So thinking differently matters. And I think when you're like me and you've grown up in the so-called dominant culture and you're educated in the Western ways, it's really hard to unpack some of that and open your mind up to almost an existential way of, challenging your thinking about the world. Not everyone has to do this, but my God, if you start to do it, it really challenges material growth and it challenges a whole bunch of things. So thinking differently is really important. So that's thinking differently. And there's a gazillion different toys and ways to play, to explore, to adventure, everything from nature play, eco-literacy, Greenprints, mapping tool, lots and lots of things. And it just depends on the group, the time, the interest, your resources, whatever you want to do. We're up to have a play and to help people engage. Defining ecological boundaries, really, really, really important. You can play with local boundaries. You might be a school and you just want to engage with ecosystems in your local area, but also locate yourself in the bigger picture. You might be a local council and you want to see where your boundaries fit locally. And then the big challenge and the stuff that a lot of folks are working on, and we've been in discussions with Will Steffen and others around the world, is this idea of downscaling planetary boundaries, so that we can do good things as in our own place, but connect to being a good global citizen and connecting to the international efforts. And all I'll say on that is I'm really pleased to see in the last year or two, Will Steffen and others are shifting away from downscaling planetary boundaries to upscaling local efforts. And there's a whole body of work on that. And if you want to hear a brilliant webinar by Will, you'll find a recording of his talk earlier this year on our Greenprints website. It's really important stuff. And planetary boundaries as a concept, which emerged in 2009, has really, it triggered donor economics, and that's triggering a really broad scale movement around different ways of focusing on economics. So finding our boundaries, at least thinking about them. You don't have to become an expert. It doesn't have to turn into a Western scientific indicators, fiesta, but starting to think about these things happening in places. Because our political boundaries are colonial. They're 3 levels of government in this continent are questionable. The roles that local councils have versus state governments. All of these issues, none of it is set in concrete. None of it is like gravity. All of these rules can be changed. And surprisingly, some of the stuff around local council control could be changed with effective strategies. All right, understanding our foundations. This to me is the absolute joy of even working on Greenprints. Every time we start working with different communities, we help them start to gather info. And there's so much info out there. Who else lives here with us? Where are the animals, the plants, the support systems? What's the unique elements of their geography, their soil, their trees? What does ecological integrity look like in this place? And asking all these questions before we start dabbling with human wants and desires is a very powerful act in itself. So many different tools, again, Indigenous knowledge right up front, but history, understanding colonization, Western science, etc. Understanding human activities. Now that we've located ourselves, we've started to get to know the local frogs and geckos, if we're lucky enough to have some. How do we start understanding humanity's activities? The history of what's been going on here, the history of colonization, the economic models, ideas, thinking, the economic activities, industries. It's really interesting. It's one of the first things James and I do when we open a Greenprints workbook, is we actually go, what's going on in the region? James is wonderful at grabbing research, really great research quickly. I'm a bit slower, so I let him do it. What are the key industries? Where's the money really going? A lot of people think it's this or it's that. It's really always health and education. Mining is often tiny, but we've had all this propaganda. But actually understanding what's going on in your place is incredibly powerful. And what I was going to say is this is the area where you get into some of the sustainable development goals, where you get into new ways of thinking about economics. One of the many things we've been proud of over the last 10 years is that AELA actually auspiced the creation of the New Economy Network Australia, and it embraces new thinking in economics to support the living world, including wellbeing economics, but also donor economics. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but the thing to think about is it talks about, quite literally, look at that image, the safe and just space for humanity. If you take that into its proper meaning, then you're going to end up with anthropocentric ideas and development yet again. Yes, you've got the planetary outer limits, but it has no talking about the local. There's been developments in the Donor Economic Action Lab around city portraits, and we're fully embracing it. It's terrific. But I'm really proud to say that I demanded James, my graphic designer extraordinaire, do this for us. We have a Greenprints donut to remind people that it's living space for the whole Earth community. And yes, we've got an ecological limit of the upper ceiling planetary, but your day-to-day activities are not normally connected to that. You're thinking about your bioregional foundations, caring for country, plants and animals, as well as the social stuff. Very important. All right, so human activities, there's so much in this space. I won't talk to it all, but we've been analysing different ways. We're working with ways to explore it. One of our wonderful contacts, Del Jones from the EVA Institute, work on nature positive everything. They can do all the crunchy number data-y things around what it would look like to change a city to become nature positive. And we're going to be engaging them in a lot of the work we do with Regen Brisbane. So it's positive, nature positive life cycle benefit analysis, all this other stuff. So tons and tons of tools. Health check, to date, one of the best ways to do any of this stuff in terms of are we living in overshoot is the ecological footprint. It's a very good tool. It's not perfect, but it is very helpful. And you can do it. You can actually just do simple land maps showing land use change. It's not, again, rocket science to work out if you have cleared 80% of your bioregion, like the Brigalow Belt bioregion that I grew up in, 80% of original vegetation cleared for agricultural animals, for sheep and cattle. That tells me that we're probably an overshoot in terms of biodiversity health and soil health. Scenario planning, I'm excited because the wonderful Kia Smith from the University of Queensland will actually be running a little workshop on scenario planning, how to do the basics, what it looks like, what it involves, what it needs. And again, if you look on the Greenprints website, her little workshop, the Greenprints Exchange, will be in July, I believe. So the scenarios are really, really important. I've already talked about them. And then the community decision-making, obviously, if you develop scenarios, someone somewhere needs to be advocating that we go in one direction or another. But hopefully the process of developing the materials, developing the community, the endless community building that goes on through these steps from step one will enable us to get to a point where some people can make some choices that might be useful. That's a whole nother bucket of fish. Yep, taking action. Obviously, people are already taking tons of terrific action in their bioregions, but the scenarios will help us, and particularly those of us who are governance nerds in the background, really start to design, well, that area and those communities really want to change ag systems, or they really want to change mining. They really want to change the particular way that these ecosystems are looked after. And that can inform whether it takes 5 years or 10 years, but that can, we may not have it with climate change, I know, but that can inform very specific, rigorous analysis, lobbying for changed laws, lobbying for changed politicians, really focusing on the end game. And that the legal stuff, as I call it, I'm very interested in that. And there's a number of young lawyers who are interested too, but the law comes at the end. Interestingly, the law reform needs to fit around what a place-based approach is. So very quickly, almost done. And I knew I'd go longer than I said I would. That's all right. That's what this workshop's about. Examples. So examples of how people may or may not be using Greenprints. We were thrilled to pieces when a number of awesome folks in Lithgow and at the University of Western Sydney who knew about Greenprints actually wrote us into one of their resilience grant applications. They've got a bunch of money to do a whole bunch of cool things inside the township of Lithgow. It's driven by community groups. And in fact, here's our little icons. It was stimulated by education processes, i.e. lovely academics in, well, pracademics in university saying, Lithgow got hit terribly by the fires. It's also a community of transition because they're looking at moving away from coal. How do they build a good, strong local economy, etc. And what they've done is they've built the teams of folks in business, in the schools, in science, communities, individuals, Indigenous folks in their project as well, and local councils are part of the project, but it's not driven by them. So here's an example of some folks looking at how do they make their communities more resilient? How do they do economic change? Connecting with us and saying, maybe Greenprints could help us, because you were saying, Michelle, it can be the scaffolding that holds it all together, even if it's not right up front. And we, of course, said, hooray, yes, we'd love to explore and experiment with you how we might be able to assist. So for anyone who doesn't know where Lithgow is, that's Sydney. This is Lithgow. Lithgow local council area, which I'll show you in a minute, sits across a couple of bioregions, but the town itself is firmly in this bioregion, and we've got tons of other maps on the catchments and the creeks. But as an example, we'll be working with this team of folks who are looking across community arts projects, really a fantastic project looking at what kind of new industries they might like and how to train up new apprentices and tradies to do renewable energy and a whole bunch of other things. They've got citizen science projects around river turtles. They've got schools involved. They've got all this other stuff. And we're right in there with them, looking at the evaluation approaches, supporting them with a bit of data and mapping, and ultimately thinking about how all of their community activity and the studying of nature can be pieced together to really show, does all of this stuff fit within this bioregion and these places? And if they're recommending certain industries, what's the impact of that going to be? And can we pattern ourselves into this place to live here forever in a more effective way? Or can we pull together the data to really show that these kinds of economic transformations will be cool? So we'll be using the Greenprint steps in the background. We'll be helping facilitate pockets of workshops, but it's their project, and we're really, really excited to be working with them. And this shows Lithgow proper, 3 bioregions around it, and just the township of Lithgow. And sorry, this also shows the city council boundaries. And it's just a snippet of how we start to place and locate a town, and that immediately starts to reveal things. So you pull up a bit of the history, you show what's been going on, you identify the issues unique to that place and what kind of future will help all of life thrive. Regen Brisbane, and a bit of a shout out for Kira. Kira is part of the AELA team and is leading the coordination of our Regen Brisbane activities. Regen Brisbane has emerged from lots of different folks watching what Regen Melbourne was up to, and connecting different people. And here's a lovely flyer, just giving a gentle plug too. If you are in Brisbane or SEQ, check us out. We've got a brand new website. It's absolutely gorgeous. Thank you again to James, the graphic designer extraordinaire. So let's think about Brisbane. If we want, and I'll just jump to this. There's a big community forum next week. Well, it's online. We don't know how big it'll be. If you're interested, please join, sign up, free tickets. What will the 2032 Olympics mean for Brisbane? This is becoming a hot topic for many people. Obviously, the Olympics, some of the infrastructure development and changes can be profoundly bad for a place, or they can be better and good-ish. So what we're interested in for Regen Brisbane is if you place Brisbane inside the bioregion, so that's its bioregion, Brisbane's here, all the little colours are subregions, and you start looking at the city itself and what it's up to, then you start to locate it into its living systems. With Kira's wonderful work, we're connecting with catchment management groups, the Queensland Social Enterprise Council, obviously Indigenous groups, lots of other interested parties who want to come together and go, yeah, what does the future of this place look like? How could it be sustainable, regenerative?
Just a sec, Forrest, be right with you.
Christina, would you mind just checking someone's off mute? Can you just check and mute them? You have the...
Is that you, please?
If you're not on mute, would you mind...
Too bad. How are you going? Good. Sure.
Okay, so I'll just keep going. So we've got that community forum. We've also got a series of workshops, which I'd love to plug to anyone who's interested. We're just about to start promoting them. But the whole point of Regen Brisbane is to bring awesome people together and to start to think about In the case of Regen Melbourne, they used donut economics as an excellent starting point. How could Melbourne live within the donut? They had a series of workshops where people were talking about their vision for Melbourne, and they produced these beautiful materials. And they're lucky down there because there's a lot of philanthropic funding, and they did a great job. They've now got a couple of people being paid to run the Regen Melbourne project. What we're excited about up in Brisbane, and now a few other regen communities are connecting with us, is we're going to use Greenprints to actually embed it into the place, as well as do the social visioning, rather than do the social visioning first. So that's Regen Brisbane. At the Gold Coast, I want to do a lovely call out for Edible Scapes with Jorge and Zane and a few other folks. It was really cool. They listened to one little workshop I gave on Greenprints last year, and Jorge, who runs this beautiful edible garden, a community garden, and they connect with a whole bunch of other really important food justice issues in their community. They want to use Greenprints as a catalyst to bring other groups who are already doing terrific things down there together. And I'm looking forward to working with them to perhaps host even like a mini festival or something in their beautiful open space to bring more people together and start mapping out the story of the place. And what's going on. And there's already the wonderful Zane, a young fellow who's volunteering to help pull together the workbook for some of that work. And of course, all of that in the SEQ comes together, which is also good. The only other thing I wanted to say, hooray, I'm nearly finished, God, I can talk, is the connecting, learning, locating. In addition to place-based work, and not everyone has the capacity to do that, there's ways to connect with Greenprints to just get your own thinking going, to start thinking about your own business or your own social enterprise, or schools, education, students, because one of our beliefs responding to problem 2 is this disconnection from place. The more people who can connect with their local place and at least try to understand it and make decisions that are good for everything that lives here, the better. So locating ourselves within our bioregion or catchment and trying to connect with existing initiatives that are caring for place, like catchment management groups, wildlife carers, et cetera, it really supports a localized way of building each other's work and building each other's momentum. So that's about, this is just an example, either connecting with us, or we've got the beginnings of our democratizing map. At the moment, we have a simple map on our website where you can type in your address or postcode and find out which bioregion you belong to. And we're working in the background on gathering some fun materials from other places and from our own research, so people can actually start to get to know their bioregion, their catchment. Ultimately, I have a dream of an app where you can plug in your address and actually find where you live, who else is out there caring for the earth, where all the regenerative and other initiatives are. Just a way, again, to connect. So we're all moving in generally a fuddly general kind of good direction. So you work out where you live, you work out the unique qualities of place, you look at the health of the region, you look at what people are up to, you look at where the money and the economics are working and how they're not working. How do we support earth-centered life? And then X marks the spot, locating yourself in place and starting to be aware of all the things that you do and can do. And that is the end of my very, very long talk. I do hope that I have not put you to sleep. We'll turn in a minute to questions. Perhaps if anyone needs to rush off and get a drink and you do want to hear the discussion, please do so now. I'm going to have a little drink and I will stop. But before I stop sharing, we have a dedicated Greenprints email address, and myself and James and Kira and others will keep an eye on that. If you need to duck off and you're already overwhelmed by my very long presentation, please get in touch anytime. We're super keen to connect with anyone we can who wants to find out more or start to experiment with some of these ideas. So greenprints@earthlaws.org.au, and our cute little website, which only shows the tip of the iceberg of what we've been working on, greenprints.org.au. And now, with great joy and happiness, I'm going to stop talking. Christina, are there any questions or are people asleep?
We do have 2 questions.
Yep.
So the first question is from Kelly Reefer, and she's asked, is Louise Crabtree's talk posted anywhere?
Great question. I think she did a version of it for the Nina Housing Week in 2021. So last year we ran this cool week of activities. I'll have a look for it in a minute. It's on the neweconomy.org.au website. Yeah, that might be one place to find it. And it is really cool. You could also, if you're inclined, look up her research. Actually, I think I've got a copy of one of her papers. So please email us greenprints@earthlaws.org.au, etc. If you need that. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you. And the second question is from Sharon Maloney, and she said, will this PowerPoint be available for us after this seminar?
Absolutamente. We will put this recording on our Greenprints website and flag it on the AELA website. And I will put these slides up because they're getting cuter and cuter as James produces more of our beautiful graphics. So thank you. Are there any other questions? I'm totally fine if there aren't, or if people want to jump off. I'll give you a moment to have a think, because no one is jumping off, so we're still here. Don't be shy, it's only me.
Hi, Michelle.
Oh, yeah, no, please unmute, just go for it, Dal. Yeah.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. Just so inspiring to see the work that you're doing and how you've extended, especially the donut economics, to include all worlds of you know, the earth, and how inclusive it is of everybody and every living thing. It's really inspiring. That's why I was asking the question, is this PowerPoint going to be available? Because there's lots of people I'd like to share it with.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the image, we're really happy for you to share it. We've got, James can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have a nice version of it on the Greenprints website. Quite literally, you can just copy that image. If you could keep the Greenprints logo on it, that would make us delightfully happy. But share it with anyone. And also, I'm very behind with my little blog that I started last year. At the moment, it looks like I'm only up to October last year, but I've got a bunch of stories about our work that I haven't yet published. Christina Dull, would you mind just put the link for my Earthwords and Ponderings blog? And the reason is, if you copy the link about Greenprints and the donut and share that with your friends, you'll actually see some of the rationale behind. I mean, we complement quite enthusiastically donut economics. It's a brilliant way for people to engage with, you know, our finite world. But I also talk about why we added all the plants and animals. So that might be another way to share. And when you copy that link, the image shows up, because I shared it in LinkedIn, and there's a little discussion about it.
That would be great. Thank you. Because I've just completed a 8-week program with the Pachamama Alliance, and I noticed how northern hemispheric dominant it was. And I'm like, well, there's heaps of beautiful things going on in the southern hemisphere as well. And this presentation alone is such a great way to communicate some of that to the northern hemisphere folks who don't actually know what's going on here.
I agree. And don't get me started. I do have a little rant. I'm on a lot of international networks, and Australia and the Pacific is always forgotten by the northern hemisphere people. Like, wow, the stories I could tell about staying up at midnight to give presentations to very large NGOs who really still don't get that they're not the center of the world. It's very strange. And I don't mean to be harsh, but and we have to challenge this in Australia, you know, and I've been banging on for decades. We've got the oldest continuous culture on earth in this.
Totally.
You should listen. And non-Indigenous people are doing great things in Australia. And look, it's why we focus so much on Oz, because we love it with every fiber of our being, but we have amazing opportunities on this continent to do things that are beautiful, because we are a big giant island, and we can look after a country better without. Anyway,
absolutely. And we have this incredible Indigenous wisdom to draw on. Who
exactly. And one thing I didn't plug, I must add to these slides before I put them up, is so the Future Dreaming, the organization that Mary Graham and myself and Ross Williams and James created, is a really fantastic space. Let me just put that up. Christina may do it too, but futuredreaming.org.au. Please check it out. We're trying to grow its capacity to share information. A couple of weeks ago, we had a webinar on the work of land and sea rangers, Indigenous land and sea rangers. We run workshops, really promoting just this generosity of spirit that many of the Indigenous people come to, sharing their knowledge, if only people will listen to them. So, hey, I did notice a question. Someone's asked about Regen Sydney. Yes, Regen Sydney has a website. I actually will look for it in a moment, but if you Google Regen Sydney, it should pop up. It's run by some wonderful people who are also interconnected with NINA, and they're endorsing Greenprints as something they're going to connect with, as well as donor economics, which we're really excited about. Are there any other questions you can see, Christina? No? Did anyone else? Oh, did someone want to raise their hand if they want to chat? Oh, Sue Gilby. Yeah, I see you with your hand.
Of all the economies that are available, do you promote the donut over all of the others, or as opposed especially to the steady state?
Wow, what a big question. All right, can I answer that with just a couple of minutes of explanation? So, neoclassical or modern capitalist economics is seen as having a lot of origins, but if you think about it simply, the idea that nature is just property emerged in Europe and is deeply embedded in their law. Our modern Australian law comes from Britain. We have a capitalist growth economy, let's keep it at that. And it's gone through different ebbs and flows. And since the 1950s in particular, consumer capitalism has really said life isn't about supporting needs, it's actually about supply and demand. It's about making stuff and selling stuff. And in the 1950s, and I can point you to a fantastic article called The Gospel of Consumption, freely available on Orion magazine. I can pop that in there later. It talked about how literally the industry leaders in major corporations, particularly in the US, decided in the 1950s that modern technology was actually able to make what people needed within a couple of days of work a week. But they didn't want to lose their status or their money or their power. So they created the advertising industry. And that then generated demand for things we didn't actually need. That might sound flippant and like a conspiracy theory, but if you read the article, they're actually showing original documents where these corporate leaders said, gosh, we need to create demand for all these products so we can make more things. And they sort of single-handedly wrote down the death knell. That's what triggered the great acceleration that has forced climate change, even on top of the Industrial Revolution. So if you think about the modern economic system as growth focused, the idea that GDP measures goods and services that are done, sold, exchanged, and that's all it measures. And all nation states are connected to that and endorse GDP through an international, the UN process, back again in the 40s and 50s. Then the economy doesn't exist so much as different ways to think about economic activities and different nation states doing things that they call the economy. So right now, places like mainstream Australia, we're connected into the global economy. We use money as a basis of exchange. We have elites controlling a lot of the decision-making. We have governments embedded in the GDP way, and social justice is declining, the environment's declining. So your question, which economic ideas or theories are better? Anything that challenges growth is a better way forward. You don't have to become obsessed with it, but thinking about steady state, donor economics, and all these ideas is a really good place to start. Because in a nutshell, donut economics is still building on top of 30 or 40 years of other economic analysis. In 1973, Herman Daly, sort of the father of ecological economics, started to explain to people in his work, hey, if you're just looking at supply and demand, GDP, that's like a veterinarian saying, we've got a sick dog here, I'm just going to look at its intestines. Doesn't look at what goes in, doesn't look at what goes out, doesn't look at the broader dog. So our economic system in modern terms is really just focused on buying and selling, supply and demand, ownership and structure. And the reason I give this long rambling answer is our 6 years of building NINA has shown me, a non-economist, that there have been a wide variety of excellent alternatives to unfair hyper-capitalism. And early 1970s, you've got steady state economics and ecological economics, this idea that human beings are part of the living system and we really need to factor that in, absolutely makes sense. Never got traction inside governments because they were all obsessed with growth. And in the 1980s, we saw this kind of exacerbation with neoliberalism, and then they started to get even crazier. and I saw that Shane is on here. You know much more about, ideas around communism or socialism and sharing more broadly, being more socially just. Those ideas have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And just remember that pre-European colonization of the world, I always say to people, imagine the world in 1300. Most people were in their own kind of continents or places. There were different economic systems all around the place. You had matriarchal, sharing, some version of socialism in many different kinds of communities, the sharing economy in Indigenous communities. So today we face a crisis because modern economics has wrapped itself up, particularly since the 50s, as a godlike substance that cannot be changed. And our job is to break apart the unfairness of it and find new ways forward. If I was you and you were interested in getting your head around it, I would actually read a bit about steady state economics. It's really good stuff. I would read about diverse economies and the Community Economies Institute with Stephen Healy and Joe McNeil. And it's beautiful. It's got the iceberg reminding people that what we think is the economy, shareholding, corporate stories, is not the economy. The real economy is all of us muddling through, swapping with a friend to look after the dog, swapping shirts, going somewhere else, blah, 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 growing food. So steady state economics, diverse and communities economies, then read a bit about donut economics and you'll have some perspective. Donut economics is terrific because she literally drew a circle inside planetary boundaries, went, oh, they've finally quantified that the planet is finite. But you don't need a quantification. No, the planet is finite. You just need to understand that we are finite. So have a look at the New Economy website and get involved with localization and anything that you can get up to locally. That's my advice. And of course, everything has to be about caring for the living world first. So break down any ideas of what an economy even is and think about a society. Sorry, should have said that first. That was a very long answer. Any other questions, Christina?
There's just a few that have come in the chat. Leanne Thompson asked, does the mapping project plan to include businesses that use Greenprints as a defining concept?
That is a good question. We don't want to be ideological about Greenprints. We really want it to be this kind of pathway that can help people if it helps them. Certainly on our maps, we're about to, James doesn't know this yet, we're about to put some maps on the Greenprints website that just show who's working on Greenprints right now so that you can connect. If you were, oh, there's a Sunny Coast thing, I'd like to find who's doing that. Certainly any businesses who want to sign up and connect, we will show that they're doing good things. But in terms of the mapping tool, it's more about people getting access to all the different layers, saying what's going on in where is my bioregion? What's going on in land use? There's this wonderful big national system that shows residential, industrial, organic farming, ag farming, cattle, sheep, it literally shows you what's going on. And that's the goal of the mapping tool, is more for people to be able to find out about land use, and we want to connect it to things like the National Pollutant Inventory. You may not know, but businesses or big corps are meant to be reporting on chemicals they use. That doesn't show up in land mapping, does it? So what we want to do, and I'm not sure even how to do it yet, is actually have a live map where you can go, what's going on in my bioregion? Where's the land use? What chemicals are being used in my bioregion? How do I connect looking at my world map with the information that is meant to be going into the National Pollutant Inventory, and connecting it up with whole other things too, water quality, plans for the future, make it all easier to understand. So I hope that answers your question. Leanne, yes.
Yeah, what about citizen science projects and things that are happening within universities to do things like soil testing and stuff like that? I know that that's happening around some permaculture initiatives. And
yeah, we love citizen science. Again, my dream is to have some kind of app or function where people can see all of that stuff and connect with it. Right now, it's quite a task to find out where all the good stuff is. And a lot of that is going to have to depend on getting a few more resources for Greenprints. I mean, we've really built Greenprints up until the middle of last year. It's just all been volunteer time by me. And then when James came on board with a lot of additional research, and we've only just been funded, AELA has only just been funded for the last 12 months. A couple of us are now getting a bit of pay, but that could only last another, whatever, 6 months, we don't know. So if we can get the resources, absolutely show off citizen science. And if communities become the catalysts to say, oh, we'd like to do this, just, have a look at what's going on, we'll be helping them run the kinds of gatherings that bring all the other good people together, and a show and tell, like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And to me, that's really exciting, to respect all the work that's already going on, to feed it all in. There could be someone there worried about water quality, and then there's a citizen science project counting the turtles, and they get together and go, oh, I did not know that these turtles lived here. And then businesses could accidentally learn about it. Wouldn't that be great too? And governments could go, oh, wow, look at all this info. Anyway, I'm being flippant, but yeah, good things, good things. Oh yeah, and Carrie's written, it's Planet Localization Week this week. Yes, it is. Local Futures is a lovely international network with Helena Norberg-Hodge. This week was World Localization Day. Well, they started as a day and it's now a month. To celebrate it, Nina, so myself and Rhiannon hosted 3 beautiful ladies talking about local communities surviving the floods in the Northern Rivers. If you're interested, it is a really powerful, uplifting, devastating set of stories, and it will be on the Nina website probably by early next week. So thanks for pointing that out, Carrie. We have 5 minutes left. Supriya has asked, idea of evergreen direct investing as opposed to GDP. That's not one I'm familiar with, but anything that challenges GDP is good. And certainly investment and finances are, on the one hand, none of it's real, but on the other hand, we have entire hundreds of millions of people whose lives are affected by it. So if that is something that challenges GDP and contributes in to the good stuff, I'd love to explore it. And just on that, on GDP, the well-being economy movement, which has really, really taken off in the last, well, Nina is older than really, we were born in 2016, 2017. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we all internationally, was built 2017. We're part of it. You've got well-being indicators and well-being budgets popping up in New Zealand, other countries, even in Australia. A couple of state governments are looking at what would it look like to create a well-being budget. And we've got the Australian National Development Index, ANDI, which I recommend you have a look at. It's a fantastic piece of work. Like my other quote, all models are wrong, some are useful, nothing's perfect, but have a look at it. It's been a lot of work put in by Mike Salvaris and others. So yeah. And Supriya, if you think we should know about this EDI thing, please send us an email. We are hungry, hungry, hungry hippos. We like gathering and collecting ideas so that they might be useful to others.
Michelle, there's just one last question from Supriya. She said, is there any website or app to find out what animals are endangered in my local area or across Australia?
That is such a good question. I'm not sure that I know an answer to that. If anybody else knows, could you please let me know? We've got the IUCN's red list. I can't recall if they've got maps on their website. It's been a little while. I'm sure that WWF, ACF, some of the big ENGOs may have that info. Good. James is saying the Atlas of Living Australia. James, do you want to say something about that? He's shy. He hates me putting him on the spot.
Sorry, I'm not really unmuted.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that has the exact list of endangered species, but it does have a really good searchable database. It does also relate to a lot of citizen science, so a lot of the sightings are based around where human settlements are, so it can be a bit skewed that way, but it should link in with IUCN stuff as well.
Cool. Thanks, James. I often forget what the Atlas of Living Australia has, but there's tons of info out there, Supriya. I'm sure if you have a little poke around, you'll find it. And again, if you find it, let us know. We'll add it to our little Greenprints, the get to know your region.
Yeah.
We'll pop it in there. Thank you.
Yeah, Atlas of Living Australia doesn't actually have it at the localized level, so
Right.
I will take a further look at it. Thanks.
A further look, and it could be a prompt for us to add it to our wish list of things we want, all of us to be able to access and understand. And if anyone out there knows anyone with funding that could support the development of the mapping tool, let us know. I've never been blatant chasing money. I've always been bad at it, but we really want to develop and democratize all this information so people can really grab it and have a look. I dream of an app. Who knew? All right, people are saying thanks, and we've got 1 minute to go. How good are we? Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to me talk for so long. I know public lectures can be a bit exhausting, but I'm grateful for your time. If you're interested in Greenprints, oh, I like that, Leanne. How to get this on mainstream TV. Again, we will go anywhere, talk to anyone. If anyone ever wants us to give a yarn to a community or can get a bigger reach, let us know. We're really happy to talk and work with anyone. So thank you heaps for your time. If you're interested in anything, check out the Greenprints website. It's got a nice intro to some of what we're up to. If you really want to get cracking and do things, send us an email. We'd love to talk to you. If you know any funding opportunities, let us know that too, because like I was just saying, the mapping tool is going to need a little bit of extra expertise, and volunteers in that space aren't very forthcoming. And a huge thank you again to my team, Christina, James, Kira on this call. And if anyone else in AELA is on this call, please forgive me, I can't see you. But thanks for being awesome. It's now 1:30. We will sign off. Thanks everyone for your time.